Hello, folks. This is Michael with the Reason RX podcast and my co-host,
Melanie
in Minnesota, and Michael in Houston. So, hope you're doing well, enjoying the podcast. As always, if you find it valuable, if you could leave a rational review, leave a good rating, make this more accessible and more known in the podcast app so it can reach other people too. Rational ideas are valuable. We need more in the culture. We need more awareness of how different aspects of our nature are important, have to be developed, and they all interact with each other. We can't look at one thing in isolation. We can't study math 10 hours a day and do nothing else and expect to get better at math. We got to sleep. We have to have a good diet. We need to move. There's this interaction. So things like that. If you got some people who are parents, pass this on, let them listen. Any teachers or fellow teachers, school administrators, this would be valuable information for people. And if you can do a little more and donate, help develop the show, better sound equipment, have someone take care of some marketing or whatever, and get some headphones for Melanie. That'd be nice. So the culture would appreciate it. We'd appreciate it. You'd appreciate it. It'd be good all around. So anything else to say on that, Melanie?
I want headphones. I'm just kind of kidding. Yeah. But there is a lot that goes into making a podcast, which we didn't realize when we set on this journey. And because of that, it's great, that people value it and they want to show they do. Even a smallest amount will be appreciated and helpful. So that would be great. Thanks.
$3 a month, $5 a month.
100, 500. I mean,
yeah.
It's worth a lot to you.
If someone can afford it, some people can. They have plenty.
Yeah, there's.
It's a valuable thing that needs to be promoted. But so, as we were saying, we need to develop all aspects of our rational animal nature, the fact that we're humans, to really survive and thrive and be happy, and for education to function properly. It comes up in the book Spark by John Rady, and it's something that Maria Montessori knew a long ago in some ways, because that's a starting point that we can build on. We don't have to know every single thing before we can ever act. And sometimes a scientific explanation does not add anything to our action, or it never adds anything to reality. Reality is already there. It's just a matter of when we finally figure it out. And so, even without knowing all the detail, Montessori could tell by observation, by experience, by basic inductive science, that what she was doing was right and worked in accordance with human nature. And she knew that you had to look at different aspects of a person. They're in the classroom, they're moving around, they're sitting on the floor, they do gardening, they get outside, they do chores. So there's individual behavior, action, social behavior. There's all the stuff that they're doing. They don't sit down in a desk at a book like a little freaking computer, that is no physical being. And a computer does, but I mean, not like a human, like physical fitness stuff, where movement's important. No biological nature, no needs, no social thing, Montessori knew that they needed to move. So it's important for a lot of teachers, a lot of parents to look into Montessori education. It'll help out a lot. And that's why we're having, again, back today, the Montessori Expert Charlotte Cushman.
All right. Woo!
Anything else to say, Melanie?
I just, echo that. She's amazing, and I can't wait to hear everything she'll add on to what she already told us about before. So today is part 2 of having Char on and sharing her wisdom and experience with
the
us.
Charlotte Cushman story, part 2.
Yeah. Do you want to give us a little quick rundown of your background again, Char, just to kind of bring everybody up to speed?
Okay. When I went to college at Lewis and Clark and majored in elementary education, and immediately upon graduation, I took my Montessori training, and I co-owned and operated 2 private schools and taught for over 40 years. And then I wrote 2 books, Montessori, Why It Matters for Your Child's Success and Happiness, and then a children's book called Your Life Belongs to You, which is the history of the United States. Also, to back up, when I was in college, I went on an overseas study program to Japan, and I did my independent study project on discipline in Japan, which at that time was very different from the way we discipline our kids in this country. So that's the background.
Cool.
Which would be interesting to hear a little bit about if you want to, just to give us a little light in that. What did you find out when you were there?
Well, you want to get into that later? Because we're going to talk about discipline a lot.
Oh, for just the discipline side? Okay.
Yeah,
we could do that.
I don't know if you want to get into the discipline thing in Japan, so we'll be talking about that more later.
Yeah, we can do that later.
Yeah.
That's sure.
But unless you want to talk about how you enjoyed the sushi and things like that and make us jealous. And how you got to see some of the things that inspired Frank Lloyd Wright.
I don't think we saw that building. I loved Japan, though. Loved it.
Yeah. Be nice. But, so, and then folks can look back at the previous episode. Was it 19, Melanie? No, that was Janet. I forgot, but look back at a previous episode and listen to that. And Charlotte discusses more of her, episode 21. She discusses more of her background. And that's a good episode to listen to anyway.
Yeah, it's episode 21.
Yeah. So, one thing we need to do, we didn't do last time, had a lot of good discussion, but to make sure folks are clear, I mean, I put links in the show notes, but it'd be good for someone who's taught Montessori, has children who've gone to Montessori, has written books about Montessori, has owned a Montessori school, and is trained under someone who was trained under Montessori, who trained with Montessori herself and who knew her. It'd be good for you to talk about what Montessori is. Talk about, for one thing, we need to know what it is so we can institute some of those ideas and principles into the home and the classroom. Although really Montessori is a system, and properly done, it has to be done as a whole integrated, unified, holistic system. But better something than nothing. But, and then, I forgot what I was going to say. So, yeah, we know how to tell, the good from the bad. What's Montessori in name only and is really fake and is not really Montessori versus what's authentic, substantial, essential Montessori. So, will you elaborate and enlighten us? We'd like an encyclopedia, please.
Okay. Montessori is a system of education that was developed by a woman named Maria Montessori, who was she was the first doctor in Italy and...
First woman doctor.
First woman doctor, yeah. Thanks.
The first doctor Italy ever had.
And then she got involved in education, and then, then she developed it from there. But if you want to explain to people what Montessori is in one word, Harry Binswanger and Michael Berliner wrote a really, really excellent article about what Montessori is years ago. And they started out by saying, in a word, it's independence. So in the Montessori method, we're trying to get the child to be independent, to dress themselves, to choose their own work, to do their own thinking, and all of that. One of the key things in the Montessori method is that children have sensitive periods for learning. And Montessori did not primarily discover them, but she discovered that that sensitive periods go far beyond what was thought. A sensitive period is a time in your life where you're naturally drawn towards learning something. And nobody sits down and teaches you. Like, nobody sits down and teaches children how to crawl or how to walk, how to talk. They observe, and when their brain is ready, that's the sensitive period. Then they very naturally are drawn right in towards doing it. Now, once that sensitive period is gone, though, that part of the brain, kind of closes down, and then the next part opens up. And once that happens, it's not that you can't learn it. Like, it's not that as an adult you can't learn a foreign language, but it's a lot harder. So one of the glories of the Montessori system is that it gets the children in all of their sensitive periods, because there's a sensitive period for grammar, a sensitive period for reading, a sensitive period for addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. There's a sensitive period for social skills, a sensitive period for concentration, and all of that. So that part is very important, an important part of the Montessori method. Montessori developed materials for the children to work with, and they're all systematic. So it starts out with things that are very concrete, things that are very simple, and it goes step by step by step towards the abstract, or step by step towards things that are more challenging. And then these materials that she developed, for the most part, not 100%, but for the most part, they have a control of error in them, so that if a child is working with some math material and they're making mistakes, they can see for themselves that they made a mistake. It doesn't take an adult to come by and say, oh, you made a mistake. They can see, and then they can redo it and keep working on it as much as they need to until they understand it. And understanding is very important in Montessori. It's not a system of memorization. It's a system of understanding. For example, when they learn multiplication, they work with beads and other things where they learn what multiplication is. What is it? What does it mean? What does it involve? Once they understand the process of multiplication, then eventually they can memorize the tables. But they don't do that, right away. Then another aspect of Montessori is the mixed age groups. That's very important. You have 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, and 6-year-olds all in the same class. It's beneficial for everybody.
And it's natural.
The young children come in, and how did they learn how to walk, and how did they learn how to talk? Well, it was from observing the adult. So they come into this classroom of older children, and they observe them and they learn. And I was a lot of times flabbergasted when I would sit down, say, to show a child how to multiply, and they would just kind of take over and they'd do it. And I'd say, well, how did you know how to do that? And they'd say, well, I watched Sarah do it all last year. So that is very beneficial. And then for the older child, this 5- and 6-year-old, they remember what it was like to be 2 years old and 3 years old and not be able to tie your own shoes. So they go and they help the younger ones. And, a lot of times you think you know something until you go to help somebody else.
Yeah.
So, and then, to see the younger kids, like, cut paper or pour water, to see them do that, it reminds them, oh yeah, I really liked doing that when I was that age. And so they'll take it up and they'll practice it again. And maybe some of the older kids really need to practice that again. Maybe they're still having a little trouble with the pencil, and they need to spin their head a little bit. So that's I don't know why some Montessori schools or separate the kids out, like they'll have a 3-year-old room and a 4-year-old room, and that's just not that's not Montessori. It's not true Montessori.
Mm-hmm.
And then to answer your question about how do you know if it's a real Montessori, that's very difficult to answer, because for the layman to walk in and know is hard. But for one thing, at the mixed age groups, the Montessori Materials, you want to have a Montessori trained teacher. If you walk in and the kids are chaotic, well, of course, it's different than the traditional classroom where everybody's doing the same thing all at the same time. The children are all working independently. So some people may think that's chaotic because they're not used to that. But I mean, if the kids are running around the room and throwing things and the teacher does nothing, it's not okay.
Yeah.
Now, I know there were some schools in Oregon when I lived out there that called themselves a Montessori school, and they had a couple of Montessori materials. That's not a Montessori school, just because they have a few materials. Or they'll say based on the Montessori method. Well, because just because you have the pink tower and the broad stair doesn't mean you're based on the Montessori method.
Yeah, right. And
what was that? I didn't hear what. Just because you have the what chart?
Just because you have the pink tower and the broad stair, that doesn't mean you're based on the Montessori method. Sorry.
And what tools are those? What are they used for?
Those are sensorial materials. The tower is used to teach the child about size discrimination, and the broad stair is width discrimination.
And how do they work? How could people picture it in their heads?
Well, the tower is in 10. It has 10 pieces to it. It starts out with the biggest cube, and then each cube thereafter goes a little bit smaller until you get to the tiniest cube, which is 1 centimeter on each side. And you take the child to the mat, you take the child to the shelf and you show them how to carry them, and they carry them one by one with one hand on top and one hand on the bottom, because you want them not just visually to see the difference in size, but to feel the difference in size, and also the difference in weight.
Mm-hmm.
They carry them to the mat one by one. Then the child sits there and you tell them to watch you. Mm-hmm. And you show them how to build it one by one. And then you don't knock it over, because we teach them respect for property. And then you show them how to take it down one by one. And then you say, okay, now you can try. And if they make mistakes, they make mistakes. And you don't, no, you got it wrong. You don't say that. If they are abusive with the material and they're knocking it over on purpose, then you say, let's put it away. But if they're making a lot of mistakes, you can say, watch me again. Mm-hmm. And then you can show it to them again. But usually I didn't do that. I just let them go. And then in time, especially, again, because they're in an environment with older kids, they get to watch the kids who know how to put it in order again and again and again. So they get the demonstration again. And eventually they get it right. They put them in the proper order. And then once they do that, then you can show them variations to it where let's say they can put the tower in order and the broad stair in order and the long rods in order and the knob cylinders in order. And then they can combine them and make different, which is really fun.
And then people can see some of that. Maybe I'll put some links in the show notes for pictures, and people can look at it as we're talking and go back and rewind some.
Yes.
But some of the stuff's pictured in, what is it, Dr. Montessori's own handbook? Is that the one that has these?
Well, a lot of her books have pictures, so I don't know.
I know
but
some
I have some good pictures I can send you.
Yeah, I can just give links on the internet. Be easier for people, I think.
I have some pictures that I can send you.
Okay, cool, thanks. What's a stair thing?
That differs in width, and those are prisms, not cubes.
Okay. But yeah, I think getting philosophical, because it's important to do in education. Philosophy is important, as we talked about before. I think some of the stuff there too, it shows the very important fact. It helps students learn that reality is the authority, and we can all reference ourselves to that and discuss it and look at it and see what's going right and wrong, instead of some person being an authority. And that destroys the student's ability to think for themselves and deal with the world, and therefore have a happy life. They're unguided. They can't make decisions. They have to have some person tell them what to do. And that is not a good situation. That is like unnatural. That's against the way human nature is and biology is and evolution.
Yeah, I agree. That's one reason why I love the fact that she incorporated the control of error in the majority of the material, because it doesn't require the adult. It requires the child to use his own mind to figure it out.
And then actually, that comes up in some exercise systems too. Jay Bido, who I talked to recently, was talking about some exercise systems that use self-limiting movement. So it's like self-corrective. If you're doing something, then you make a mistake, then you're learning that you're doing it wrong and the technique isn't good, instead of just throwing stuff around and doing whatever and having bad technique and undercutting yourself. It's like important things are designed into the technique and like into the movement or exercise itself. But then another way to put some of that, one of the things you said about what an authentic Montessori classroom would be like. Some people might not be able to see what's really going on, but maybe if they think about, what if adults were doing this? If adults are in a class or at work, and if they're throwing stuff around, well, clearly that's not a well-ordered business of rational people functioning independently. So it'd be the same with kids. But if the kids are, in some offices, people are running around, there's all this chaos, they're not sitting quietly at their desk waiting for permission to move, but they're getting something done, they're purposeful, they're independent, they're not getting in the way of each other, and there's this important activity going on, and no one complains about that. So if something like that is going on in a classroom, where a kid is sitting down and all of a sudden gets up and goes like hurriedly to pick up something and bring it back and sits down and does his work, well, that's just like someone going to the copy machine, you know? So if there's something like that going on, then it's more likely, okay, that might be a way for some people to think about it that's more in their own experience. Because comparing it just to how a lot of the conventional classrooms are, where students are required to sit there as if they're dead and have no life, as if they're just a little rock sitting in front of a book, that's not a valid measurement or standard for how students should be. And that's against their nature. Montessori knew that students moved around. She did not have them sit at desks because she knew it was their nature to move. So she was being true to their nature.
Right. And they are growing. Their muscles are growing and they need to move. It's actually cool to make them just sit there.
Yeah.
Right. We've discussed that. That's why the holistic thing's important. We've talked about it. And the shows it comes up again. It's like Montessori knew that. It's important for education. It's important for having children develop properly in all aspects of their being and their nature. And that's why we talked about on this podcast, we talk to people who are experts in fitness, because it's not irrelevant. Movement is important to our being. And as we've talked about, to remind people, J.J. Gibson, the great psychologist, developed the idea of ecological perception. You don't see or do anything in 2 dimensions or without moving. Perception happens as you move through the environment. No movement, then impaired perception. And even without knowing all that, Montessori knew something was going on that she had to develop. And then J.J. Gibson comes along and does work that really digs into and explains what was already there and is already happening in the world. So.
Sure. Back to the control of error that you mentioned, that's built in to what she has the children do. Would you say that plays a role in development of their self-esteem? And
Definitely, yeah, because they can see for themselves that they're competent. It doesn't require an adult to say, "Oh, good job," which that's another aspect of Montessori. We're not supposed to load them on with praise like that because we want them to evaluate themselves. So yes, definitely, I think it does help them develop self-esteem. It's firsthand,
And I don't know if it's explicitly derived from Aristotle, but it's sure consistent with what he said and culturally developed from it. Because so far as I'm aware, Aristotle was the first one to say that the evidence of the senses was a basic principle of epistemology. He was the father of logic, after all. Socrates and Plato had done some work, but like Socrates in definitions, like some people know. But Aristotle was the one that, from what I've heard, studied, looked at how geometric proof was done, and he had such genius that he thought, wait, all human knowledge is like that. All human knowledge has a starting point, goes through a process of reasoning, and reaches a conclusion. All conceptual knowledge, that is, not all perceptual knowledge, but all conceptual knowledge is like that. All reasoning is the starting point. And the starting point is not the Platonic forms, but the evidence of the senses. And that's what Montessori is putting into practice, that principle that's put into practice in the educational system. Mm-hmm. And even though the kids don't know that explicitly and may never know that philosophically, still that's implicit in what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she has a whole area of the classroom devoted to sensory education.
Yeah.
I don't know of any other system does that.
Yeah. So what are some... Go ahead.
Some other systems will kind of dabble in it here and there, but she's got a whole section devoted to it.
Yeah, like touch, the haptic sense, the heft, the weight of things. It's also haptic. Vision.
Can you define that word?
Hearing. What?
Define haptic.
It's
that
just
term.
Having to do with the sense of touch. You want me to look up the actual definition?
I mean, I was just going to have you kind of just so people knew what that meant when you were using it.
Okay. So that's basically what it means.
Yeah, the sense of touch is the most important sense.
Yeah, and all it says on the internet is relating to the sense of touch. In particular, relating to the perception and manipulation of objects using the senses of touch and proprioception.
Is it H?
Yeah.
E?
No, H-A. H-A-P-T-I-C.
I've never heard that word before.
Oh. I'll send you a bill.
And here,
Tutoring.
And here you know how important it is. Isn't that great? I mean, another word for what you already do, really.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, I learned that a long time ago studying philosophy. Like when I was in college. Just because, philosophy, haptic, it's like a philosophy thing. Partly. But what are some of the things that Montessori would have students do to develop their sense of touch and observation? I mean, senses in general, sorry.
Well, sense of touch, she would have them touch rough and smooth. The rough is with sandpaper, the smooth is with, smooth wood. She had a lot of exercises where they would close their eyes or they put a blindfold on, and then they would touch things and try to distinguish between soft and rough and size. Oh gosh, there's so many things. She'd have them sort things, sort according to size, according to color. And there's also exercises where you could sort, again, using a blindfold.
Cool. That's important. And that's actually probably what some like people later in life do when they're in the FBI or CIA, stuff like that. They know how important it is. So I've even seen it in like some documentary or movie or something where, they're doing tests where a bunch of people are sitting in a room and then a sound is played and they got to write down what it is. Yeah. So it's some set, I don't know, like, I can't think of what?
Like a car going over a bridge that has those girder kind of thing sounds or something like that. You mean like by listening to different types of craft? But
then they'll give, sometimes they'll ask them questions. They might just say, what is it? But they might say, like, I don't know, is this a pencil sharpener or something that sounds similar? Is this a car going over a bump or something that sounds similar?
Oh, yeah, we did a lot of that kind of stuff where the kids would close their eyes.
Cool.
And we'd make a sound in the classroom and they'd try to guess what it was. Or we also had a tape where they listen to different sounds and then they play like a bingo game. And then they put the chip on the picture that they thought was producing, would have that sound.
Oh, that's fun.
And then the geometric solids that I was telling you about last time.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many fun games you can do with that. Like have them close their eyes and you take some of them away and then they try to guess what's missing.
Oh.
Or you put them all in a basket, they close their eyes, they'll feel one and try to tell you the name of what they're feeling, stuff like that. And they love it.
And the interesting thing was Montessori knew explicitly that was important because that's the basis of science. So again, she's not a Platonist with science. She's more Aristotelian because she's evidence of the senses, not, let's like turn away from the evidence of the senses and turn on inside our head and just make crap up,
Yes, she was definitely Aristotelian. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
I was going to throw quick in here that as a homeschool mom and I wanted to do Montessori here, I tried to buy, anything I could find that had a Montessori application to it. And some of the stuff that I had, I realized, I could have probably made this rather than getting it as a Montessori thing. So any parents out there listening that want, it's never too late to have your children put a little blindfold on and play that game with them. Right. One of the things we had, I was just going to throw, the closing the eyes thing was fun. The kids, all three of my kids loved doing that. And there would be a lot. What was that, Charlotte?
They love that, those games.
And it's a learning thing. You're not going, okay, we're going to learn how to do, you can make it out to be a game and it's fun. And they actually learn. We had these little shakers that had different amounts of beads or sand in them. And sometimes it was coarser and sometimes it was fine, but there'd be two that match and they had to find them by listening. And it's very subtle difference sometimes, but those little ears are so sharp.
Whatever.
And
you know what Melanie really did? She had her kids blindfolded and then she played her piano. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, kids, 3 notes. Is this Chopin's Prelude in A minor, or is this Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto, or
That's right, yeah, because they were just ready for that by the time they were 6. Yeah, they were ready. No, but anyway, and it's fun for the adults. So I hope any parents listening out there, go online. There's tons of ideas out there too, other than what we're saying, obviously.
Yeah.
But yeah, because kids are like sponges. They just want to learn, and it'll help them sharpen their listening and actually having them describe what it sounds like comparing, that too. It starts getting them to articulate what they're thinking. And it's just so much fun. And hopefully it can help fill in some of where maybe some of their education they're getting at school is lacking.
And it is important. Besides the FBI and CIA thing, I've like when we talked to Kim Cabrera about tracking, she recommends drawing a track until you can get it down. And that takes careful observation. That's like the same basic thing as an adult. It's important. And that's getting you out in nature. I also heard about I don't remember who the guy was, some great biologist, a teacher. He would have his graduate students look at some animal or plant or something, and he'd have them describe it. He'd say, okay, I want you to write down 100 things about this. And they look at it and they're writing, and they come to him with like 3 or 6, and that's all they can do. He says, no, get out of here. You know, he wouldn't say it like that, I guess, but basically, get the heck out of my office, go back over there and think. I want 100 things, different descriptions and identifications you've made about that thing. So it's like the same thing. You're learning to differentiate the 2 sounds or whatever, and you have to put it in words and describe it. And to be a good biologist and a good scientist, you've got to be able to look at different aspects of things and see things in detail so you can compare and contrast. Because if you can't observe something very well, then you can't compare or contrast it to anything else, then you cannot draw conclusions. Because concepts and propositions develop from seeing similarities and differences in things. The less similarities and differences you see, the less you can conceptualize or form abstractions and propositions. The more you see, the more you can do.
And I know who that scientist was that said all that. That was you, Michael. To my 3 kids. Michael's the science teacher of the 3 kids, and he'll show them a plant. Like, he'll go walk around out in Houston in the woods and different areas out there, and he'll say, okay, can you guys name this plant? And by now the kids are getting the idea what the plant's called, let alone that it's a variegated leaf, that the back is shiny or the front is, I mean, he has these guys down to super tiny details. So we went out for Leo's birthday. We're sitting at a restaurant table. There's a live plant there, and they go, okay, let's look at this plant. We've got 2 leaf, in sync, and it was just so cool. So I started videotaping because I had to send it to him. Show.
That was cool.
These are guys who would have been sitting there. How many kids sit there and just do this on their little devices and their, but now they're starting to look like, it's just beautiful. It's just seeing them not just in their own quiet, but looking at the environment and learning about what it is and what's there.
Yeah, they're doing it. They know they can. They're competent. They're engaged. They're curious. Yeah. And that's the kind of employee we'd want, right? Do you want someone who's going to play video games while they're at work, or someone who's going to be observant and finding ways you can do things better and seeing who the customers and remembering them if they're working at Starbucks or something? Oh, and then, by the way, people, if you work at Starbucks, if you could please push the damn coffee cup to the customer. That even happened today. I go to this place at Starbucks and get some coffee, and I pay for it, and she puts it near her, and I got to reach across the damn counter to get it? What kind of, inconsiderate, pathetic customer service is that? I mean, it takes just a modicum of thought to think, oh, look, me here, customer there, coffee here, push.
Maybe I should hand it to the actual person who purchased it. Yeah.
It's like, geez, be nice.
Well, cool. But gee, somebody probably didn't tell him to do that.
Yeah, right.
So
right.
When you don't think for yourself, somebody might have forgotten to tell you what to think.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a shame. But so when they're thinking for themselves and they're being observant, they're going to be a lot better employees and going to make the experience for their fellow employees better and for the customers, and it's a better world. I mean, wouldn't you like that if you had more of that stuff going on and people were more engaged and talking to you? I was talking to someone, I think we had this person on our podcast. Someone was saying, was it Scott Harris that, on one podcast, I think he said someone he read about would, instead of not talking to people in the elevator or just talking about the weather, he'd ask them stuff like, what's the most exciting thing that happened to you today? Or, I don't know to what extent he did all this, but maybe what have you learned most in life? What's the most important thing? Or what do you wish you had done before? Or stuff like that. More significant questions.
Interesting, yeah.
And even it doesn't have to be like that, but even if someone's at a place like Starbucks and they're just learning how to work and deal with people, they can even start asking, how's the weather? that could be a step in the right direction for them. And if they're more observant and independent, then they learn what the common responses are, how people act. They could start to generalize and develop more topics of conversation and more social skills from there. But
so sharp about, when the kids are in your classroom, and did parents ever come and observe that and then notice like, wow, I never thought of doing that with them? Or did you have any much interaction with parents during all of their education?
Yeah, we parents were allowed to come in and observe, and I personally didn't care how long they stayed. They could be there all during the session. I liked it because I felt it was important for them to know what was going on, But I also gave education nights. So, like, one night I would spend on practical life, then another night sensorial, another night language, another night math, another night discipline. And I would get comments then quite a bit. Oh, I never thought about, that. I always paid a lot of attention to whether my child knew the ABCs, but I never thought about, do they know the difference between rough and smooth? Mm-hmm. Do they know the difference between loud and soft? That kind of thing. So,
yeah.
So, yeah, they're just not aware of that type of thing. But they found it interesting when it was pointed out.
Yeah.
And if they read some of her books, some of that will come up. Like, one thing I think is interesting is how Montessori taught writing. And this illustrates what Charlotte said earlier, how it's systematic training. They go from concrete, step by step, to the more abstract. She knew that the skills had to be developed. So a lot of schools, and this will help us get what Montessori is by differentiating it with other systems. Like, I've heard people say contrast is the engine of induction. To form generalizations, we have to have some contrast that drives our thinking to see some things are similar and some things are different, and to get these propositions. In some systems, like the way I was taught, okay, you're doing writing. So here, you got a pencil shoved into your hand, and then you're like forced to like write all of a sudden. But in Montessori, and I'll say a little bit, then you can tell us more, Charlotte. I'll go ahead and say some stuff so you kind of know where I'm going, although because you know this and more. But when they're teaching writing, what Montessori is preparing for it, because she knew that there's motor skills that have to be developed, neurological pathways that have to be laid down, even if she didn't know, the stuff we know nowadays with like myelin and how long it takes myelin to like lay down, and the fact that you need some like cholesterol for it to form and all this stuff. But she knew, just like people did in ancient times, it takes practice to do some stuff. She broke down the skill. So to start writing, they're tracing letters with, like when they're tracing things to work on the sense of touch, it can be sandpaper or smooth, but it can be the letter A. So they trace an A on sandpaper and maybe an A or B on smooth paper. So it's smooth, but they're moving their finger over the letter while they're working on the haptic sense, and that's their focus. But they're developing the motor skills to make the letter right then, instead of having to try to do it all at once with motor skills, hold the pencil, do the letter, learn to read, learn to write, bam, all at once. They're learning to trace the letter. And then when they're doing the cylinders that Charlotte had mentioned earlier, you've got this rectangular prism, like this little kind of box made of wood, and it's got holes cut in it. And you have these cylinders you can take out of it with knobs at the top. So you grab with 2 fingers or some fingers a little knob, and you lift up a cylinder, and you got to put it in a cylindrical hole in this long rectangular thing. And the cylinders, what they're learning is, okay, like the cylinders have different heights, and so you put them at the appropriate height, or they have different widths, and you put them at the appropriate width. That's what they're learning at the time. but they're having to use their fingers to do it, so they're learning motor control. They're having to pick it up with 2 or 3 fingers, move it over, and put it down. So they're developing that skill. And so you got all this stuff that's happening that is going to feed in to writing. Instead of doing it all at once, the skill's broken down, so they're used to tracing out the shape of the letter. They're used to using their fingers. And then they get into writing, and they can build from there. So it's an integrated system like that. Very systematic, and just kind of like MoveNat. It's developed logically. You got these logical progressions that are laid out from beginning to end of beginning movement for human beings to more complex. And
right. And it goes back even further than that.
Yeah, like what?
Before you ever have them trace the sandpaper letters, or before you give them a pencil, you have them do things like pouring water, which strengthens their wrists, eye-hand coordination, using basters, eyedroppers, tweezers, tongs,
and one thing,
caps.
So they've got a pitcher of water and they got to pour it into a glass, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Clothespins, scissors, anything where they're strengthening their hand, you have them do that for a long time. And then when you see that they've mastered that kind of stuff, then they're ready, for you can give them a pencil. But also at the same time that they're doing all of those fine motor skills to get their hand ready and get it strong, and once they have started that, then they can start tracing the letters, with 2 fingers. All the puzzles, or most of the puzzles in the Montessori classroom, have those little knobs, so they're gripping it with these 3 fingers, and that is the same grip they're going to use on the pencil.
Cool.
Is those 3 pencils, or the 3 fingers, I mean.
Cool.
3 pencils.
That's beautiful.
So yeah, it's a step-by-step process, and it works great. And we have them write, actually, before they learn how to read.
Yeah, I was going to ask. Yeah, right. And why is that?
Well, when we do what's called a 3-period lesson, when they learn names of things, and we have booklets in the classroom of like parts of the airplane or kinds of airplanes, stuff like that. And they love those booklets. And once we teach them the names, then they like to make their own booklets. Mm-hmm. So that's where they start to do a lot of their writing. So once they know, like say they know the parts of the tree, then they color it. I'm going to write that down so I can send you a picture.
Cool, thanks.
Tree book. So once they know the parts, then they can color in those specific parts, and then they can write the name down on each word and make their own booklets. And they love that. And it tells them, these concepts also, it has a word that can be written down that represents those concepts. Mm-hmm. And then they want to know how to read it. It gives them a motivation because they'll see new booklets and they'll wonder, well, what is that? What is that word? What does that say? What is that?
Cool.
And it's very popular. I'll send you another picture of the kids doing that.
And one way I've heard that put is someone wrote that when they're writing, they're learning that they're putting down their own thoughts, and they're learning it inductively, and they've got that connection made so that when they read, they see they're reading other people's thoughts. Otherwise, it could just seem like something out of nowhere. But some people say that is one factor that comes into play into why they're doing that.
One factor that comes into play?
Writing before reading, so the students know that the writing represents someone's thoughts, So when they're reading, they know that they're reading someone's thoughts.
Well, I would say that probably for story writing, but at this stage that I'm talking about, it would be concepts. Mm-hmm. They're writing down the words for the concepts that they're learning.
Yeah. But so those are some Montessori materials and methods that help to illustrate what her system is about.
You know what?
What?
Sorry to interrupt, but I just remembered something else as far as the writing goes. When you hand them a pencil, they don't go straight to writing letters or numbers.
Oh, yeah.
They learn how to use what's called the metal insets, and I'll send you a picture of that too.
Cool, thanks.
With the metal insets, they learn how to control the pencil. So they're tracing around an outside inset and an inside inset, and then they draw lines in between. And with that material, all they have to concentrate on is how to manipulate the pencil and how to make it go where you want it to go, how to control the pencil. And when they get good at the metal insets, then when they go, the sandpaper letters have given them a lot of preparation for how to form the shape of the letters because they've been tracing over them for quite some time. And when they get good at the metal insets, then they can start to, they spontaneously just start to make the letters themselves.
Mm-hmm. Wow, cool.
You have to sit and say, this is how you make a B. They just start doing it.
Did you ever have students come in from other schools and they were sort of older and they should have been farther along in the process of what they could do already? How did you handle that when that would happen?
Well, that was difficult because usually those kids were past the sensitive period for concentration. They were not used to finding their own work to do. And so they would just wander around the room, and sometimes they would end up to be, discipline issues. But you just have to keep directing them back to doing something productive. And it would take longer. Like I said, once you're past the sensitive period, it isn't that you can't. It's not that they couldn't learn how to concentrate, but it was harder to get them to do that. Now, the children that would start elementary Montessori without previous Montessori experience, it would be even harder still, but they still, it was still beneficial, even so. It was beneficial for all of them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But you just have to be on them. You can't assume that, it's all going to be fine because they don't know how to focus yet.
Yeah. Takes training.
Yeah.
So if a parent's hearing this and they're saying, I wish I would have gotten my child in Montessori from the beginning. Is it too late, or is it a good idea even still? Just, maybe they can do something at home to help kind of get them, where they should be while the teachers are them during the day.
Yeah, no, it's not. Sure, it's best, if you get them at the younger the age, the better. But it's not too late. They're still going to get value out of it, and it's better than nothing. So do it.
And then, even though the kids are doing some of the stuff, and it might seem like, oh, well, it's just all rote, that's not actually what's going on. As Montessori said, a good teacher has to be like a scientist, or has to be a scientist. You got to be inquisitive, curious, watching what the student's doing. You yourself need to be observant of the students, the rate of their progress, what they need, what difficulties might be coming up, especially nowadays. It's different in our time than her time, because nowadays we got a lot more dyslexia, ADHD, autism, all these other things. you got to be really researching what can happen because of neurological conditions, diet, sleep, and stuff like that, and be on the lookout for that. If people want to, they can listen to our, episode 19 with Janet Oliver, neurodevelopment specialist. She discusses some of that. Neurodevelopment is very important for children, and it affects us. What happens when you're young affects you as an adult, So the teachers need to be loving and scientific together at the same time in an integrated fashion. What would you add to that, Charlotte?
Well, I agree with that. I don't know exactly what I would add. If you know what their sensitive periods are.
Sorry. I was just doing a little dance pretending I show off, like even Charlotte can't like add to what I said. So. Okay. Screwing around. Back to reality. Cut. Take two.
Observation is a big
Oh, yeah. I thought she was thinking. She's stuck. Her signal. She's still there.
Just so you know, if you hear us, we can't hear you, Char. You're frozen.
Yeah, let's see. Sorry, folks. We're still going. Maybe.
This is a cliffhanger.
I don't know if we should. Oh, there. Okay, she left, so I guess we'll call her back then. There. All right. So everybody can go get a drink of water, something like that. Technical malfunction. So we're calling Charlotte to get her back on. Still not back. Here she comes, maybe. But unavailable. I wonder if her...
She's calling you at the same time, maybe.
Oh, I wonder if her battery died. I wonder if she was on a laptop. Maybe her battery died.
Could be.
Internet signal, battery died. So, we'll check. There she is.
Okay, here.
Cool. Yay. That was just an opportunity for folks to get a drink of water or something like that.
Yeah, you guys just froze up.
No, you froze up. We were fine. So where's Melanie? Melanie. I guess she went to get a glass of water or something. So what were you saying? I forgot exactly when.
We were talking about what you do with kids like that
oh yeah
are blind or autistic, or you have to pick up, try to determine what steps they've missed, and then put them in there, have them go back and practice those things, or maybe practice variations of those things.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you get a child that doesn't know the sounds of the letters and is maybe they're in third grade or second grade and they don't know the sounds of the letters, well, they've got to, if they're going to learn how to read, they need to learn the sounds.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and there's like some aspects of being a scientist that a teacher has to have. Be observant, see if something's wrong, see what's normal for the kid and not for the kid, or for compared to others, find causes. With science stuff. Some people make the mistake of thinking science is all about math, or it's just something some people do in this far off la land in the ivory tower. But no, real science is what's done in the everyday world of reality and cause-effect relationships.
Yeah.
But then what would you want to talk a little bit about differentiating Montessori from other systems, like maybe it might help people know more about Montessori and what it is. If we look at Montessori versus public education or versus Waldorf or classical or something like that.
Okay, well, Waldorf, let me look at my notes here. Montessori is reality-based.
Mm-hmm.
There's no, we don't focus on fantasy and pretend. I mean, not as part of the major part of the education.
Mm-hmm.
But Waldorf emphasizes imaginary play. So that's a difference there. And public school, well, even a lot of private schools are based on John Dewey's idea of education. And he thought that the child's social life forms the basis for his development and provides a background for his work and accomplishments. So therefore, the school should revolve around social activities rather than learning objective facts. He also did not think that the adult should be the authority. So those are major problems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think especially when they're younger. I've heard that there's major problems when kids are learning too much fantasy stuff when they're too young to grasp it. What do you think that might be until they're 2 or 3 or 5 or what?
Well, it's a gradual process.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like by the time you're 5 years old, you're going to know the difference between reality and fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
You know some aspects of that, and as you grow older, you understand more and more. I remember when I was in 5th and 6th grade, even though I knew that aspects of the Twilight Zone were not real, still would scare me.
Mm-hmm. I remember that. Now you mention it, stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a gradual thing, but learning reality for the young child is very, very important, and they want to know what's real. Mm-hmm. And so you're not doing them any favors with the Waldorf approach.
Otherwise, they grow up and you got problems that we have like nowadays where some people think that they don't really know reality is. It's just a simulation. I even had a friend tell me he talked to someone and gave him a headache. They were at lunch or something, and this guy started saying that we don't know reality. We're just in a simulation. Like, you know. And then if people knew more philosophy, and if they had, that's what, so that's one among many other places and situations and things where philosophy is important. Because, and I sent my friend some text to help him in the future. But okay, if we live in a simulation, how do you know? What is a simulation? A simulation is a simulation of something. How do you know it's a simulation of something? That implies you know what the something is. If we live in a simulation of reality, that implies you know what reality is. So don't tell me we live in a simulation of reality and you don't know reality when you can't know otherwise. It's like ludicrous, by comparison to what? How do you know you're in a simulation? That means you had to have known about reality in the first place.
Yeah.
So it's just, and that's even knowing, and you can explain it just in terms of knowing about contrast and difference. You can't know that, or what is, or definition. Okay, what is a simulation? It's a simulation of something. So to know it, you got to know the something, and just differentiating it from the real thing, contrasting it, just some simple things like that. Pretty much everybody understands. But yeah, then you got too much imagination stuff at too early an age, and they can't tell the difference between reality and fantasy, and they have stuff like that, and then they're confused and anxious and live in anxiety and
have
psychological problems.
Yeah. Winding back a little bit to what I said about John Dewey, the other problem about the adult not being the authority, people will misunderstand Montessori because she let the children be free, but it was free within a structure, a definite structure. So her system is authoritative, but not dictatorial. And so I just kind of wanted to clear that up because I wouldn't misunderstand that.
Yeah.
It's not like the teacher stands there and says, you have to do this and you have to do that, but it's not a free-for-all either. They can do work that they are ready for and work that they've been shown, and they are free to choose that. But they're not free to do just whatever. Like if, for example, if some child decides, I guess I don't want to learn how to read, and so I'm not going to. No.
Yeah, and that's the unschooling thing. I'll do it when I want to.
Yeah, although there are Montessori teachers who misunderstand that aspect and do let the children do whatever they want. And so, unfortunately, because of that, there is that misconception.
Yeah. And I've heard some people in regard to parenting make that distinction that you're talking about as the distinctions are made as authoritative versus authoritarian. So, yeah, they're not, Montessori proper is not authoritarian, but it is authoritative.
Yeah, and again, the word authoritative comes from the word authority. Mm-hmm. You do have to have authority. The adults are the authority. The child does not know what he needs to know when he grows up. They rely on us for their very survival. So the adults are the authority. But the point is, the authoritative adult allows the child to make choices and will change their discipline or their rules or whatever as a child shows more maturity. And that's basically in Montessori, we do the same thing.
I think that's so important in different ways. Like if people think about it, they need an adult as an authority for different reasons. They need a role model so they can see that, whoa, someone actually does know something. It's possible. This is the human state. Because if you pretend that you don't know anything, that's what they have to look, and that's what they're going to learn. That's a bad lesson. I go so far as to say it's unethical and immoral.
Well, what shaky ground for a child to grow up on that no one around me knows anything. Yeah. It's up to me to figure it out, but if no one to turn to, no one to rely on.
And that's part of the thing I was going to say too, like that, and they need an adult who knows something for the security. It's very important. They're vulnerable. They depend on you for survival. And if you're presenting the idea that you don't know anything and you're unsure, what does that do for their security and their self-confidence and their psychology? It would wreck it.
You took the words right out of my mouth.
I know.
I was going to say just about the same thing. So you can do your dance again.
Yeah. It was quantum coupling. I did this quantum coupling and determined what your brain was going to do, and then I stripped it away and said it first.
People, the big thing is self-esteem, right? Everybody wants their child to have self-esteem. Well, and I agree, but they don't think about those kinds of things. That's going to make them feel insecure, like being around a insecure adult.
Yeah, that's like what you're modeling. Just like one reason we have a lot of people with a lot of pains and health issues and stuff nowadays is because we had bad movement role models growing up. There's bad ideas in the culture about what movement and exercise really was, what we should allow. We didn't have good movement role models. And so it affected us in the same way as in a similar way as that would.
Sure. When would you say that I mean, does anyone graduate from Montessori, or is there just a continuous Montessori approach through high school, and they just basically graduate from high school? When does Montessori tend to stop, or does it ever?
Well,
finished.
Maria Montessori herself developed it very thoroughly up through kindergarten. And I think, if I'm remembering correctly, she did a lot of work up through third grade as well, although I might be wrong about that. But fourth, fifth, and sixth grade, there were some other Montessorians who developed that part. I think it was her son and somebody else.
What was her son's name? Melanie.
Mario.
You know her son's name, right?
Mario.
That was funny because Melanie didn't know, because no one knows everything. And, so I put Mario in the show notes last time, and Melanie said, typo.
Yeah, I caught it, though, so you can thank me a little if that had been an error.
Yeah, that's true. It's a good point, too.
I am a good editor.
And I said, no, Melanie, check on it. Oh, Mario.
I did. I linked on it. Yeah, I clicked on it.
Yeah. Yeah, that was funny. But anyway, go ahead, Charlotte.
Yeah, your son.
Okay, then starting in middle school, Montessori she wrote some things about how she thought it should be done at that age.
Sorry, folks. We're just having a little fun on camera here. Sorry. Go ahead, Charlotte.
Nothing really in high school as far as I know, but there are Montessori schools that go up through high school, but they've been further developed by other people.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Our school went up through 8th grade.
Okay, that's what I was wondering too. What would it be? How different is that once you get to where the kids are already able to think abstractly? I mean, when you're already toward that sort of ability to kind of reason through, what would you say you're doing at that point? I mean, what's going on there then?
Well, they are more abstract, so you need less concrete materials for them to work with. Although even in middle school, they need a certain amount of hands-on things, like in science class, for example. So it becomes a little more traditional, where the teacher can make a presentation, a verbal presentation, and the kids take notes or they learn from a textbook. But it's not where they go in and they sit in that class all day long. I mean, they move around. They will. It's not like your typical middle school where they have a different teacher for this and a different teacher for that, and they'll have like maybe 2 or 3 teachers, but they the problem with your typical middle schools or your typical high schools is there's too many adults. They need to have, 1 or 2 adults that they can really bond with and feel secure with. And they need to be with a lot of the same group. In Montessori, when they start with kids when they're preschool, and then by the time they get to middle school and high school, and they're starting to develop their own ideas about politics or philosophy or whatever, and they're getting these ideas in their head, and they need to they want to discuss them and talk about them. They need to be with kids they can trust, and not with kids that are going to start bullying them and put them down because they think this or that. And when you have a smaller, more kind of intimate group that they've known for a long time, they're going to feel more secure expressing all of that. So, in your typical middle school, they're going, like maybe they have 6, 7 different teachers in a day and all these different classes. It's just too much.
Yeah, and the class sizes are too big and the school's too big, and it's an unnatural situation, so it's no wonder there's many behavior problems and psychological problems in schools.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I have a chapter on that in my Montessori book on the middle school. Mm-hmm. When they move into that age.
Is the day shorter as when they're, in the earlier stages of Montessori, and then it just gets progressively longer as they're able to, handle,
well, with the young children, they're still napping, so they're only in class for half a day. But then, as they get older and they're not napping, then they can be in the classroom. And, it's a very low pressure kind of situation. It's very relaxed. If they want to observe, like say, for example, the child takes a nap, then he comes back to the Montessori classroom and he's still feeling kind of sleepy, or he doesn't feel like much. He doesn't have to. He can observe, as long as he's being disruptive, he can observe what the other kids are doing. Mm-hmm. So it's not like, boy, today, we're going to do this no matter what. It's a low-key, relaxed atmosphere.
That's too much in some schools. Sometimes you have a nice teacher or principal who's more human. But, yeah, it's like someone dies in the family. Too bad. You go to school. You don't get time off. You don't get 2 weeks off to deal with the grief. You go to school. You got to take the test. You're being judged on it to get into college. It doesn't matter, and stuff like that. You're sick. Doesn't matter. You can't be absent. You got to go to school. It's craziness.
Yeah, and because Montessori is based on the individual, if they miss a week because of a death or something, then they come back and they just start from where they left off. Mm-hmm. Now that would be, that's going to vary. That's not going to be quite so much in as they get older, because as they get older, then they're going to do more lessons with the group mm-hmm. that's ready for that particular lesson. But nonetheless, it's, you still can, because it's an individualized approach, basically, you can accommodate that kind of thing more easily.
Mm-hmm. And one thing that differentiates Montessori from some other stuff, other systems, I don't know if any systems developed later using this principle after Montessori, but how did she put it? What was her terminology? Did she call it like the design classroom or what? What was the thing? Because the students are free to do everything, but it's all kind of the way she put it was all
the prepared environment.
Yeah, like, so you don't have to give them instruction because it's already bound up in the material object. Kind of like there's that self-correcting factor, but there's also that self-directing factor that's materialized in the thing.
Yeah, self-direction is another huge part of the Montessori method. The teacher gives them presentations on what they are ready for in their sensitive period, and then they are free to repeat it as much as they need to until they perfect it, until they understand it. Yeah. So, and the materials, for the most part, in the classroom are displayed in order on the shelf. So they can look and they can see where they're headed or what they're going to be ready for. Or they watch the older children and they know they're going to be ready for that someday. So they can actually observe the progression on their own.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then they come to you and you say, this is how you do it. And they just go ahead and do it because they saw someone else do it last year.
Yeah.
But I'm not being able to do my job. You already know. But you actually are doing your job.
They will come and ask, am I ready for that yet?
Cool.
Can I do that yet?
Yeah.
So like the concept hierarchy is in place very strongly.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
And how would you define hierarchy, Charlotte?
Well, you have to know the basics before you can move on to higher concepts. You have to know quantity before you learn the symbols for those quantities. And you have to understand quantity and symbol and associating quantity to symbol before you move on to addition. Mm-hmm. You have to understand addition before you move on to algebra. And so the foundation has to be set concretely before they move to the abstract.
Yeah. So just like an analogy people might think of, it's pretty instituted in martial arts. You know, you can't get a black belt until you got a brown belt or whatever the martial art is. And you can't get that until you've got something else. You know, you start with nothing, you get your white belt, and then you got to get the next belt after that. And each belt represents a level of skill development. And there's a similar thing going on cognitively with our concepts. Perception is different. It's just all there. But conceptually, you have to form some concepts. You have to form other ones. So we start with basic concepts, and then we can get one level abstract above that. And then and only then you can have one level abstract above that, because it depends on the others. And same thing with propositions. So there's a strict logical order to properly forming some concepts. Unfortunately, people can fake it with words. There can be social behavior. People can be really good at pretending and using words in some cases. But if a concept was formed in the first place, then it had to be formed logically properly. And if we're going to understand a concept, it has to be by going through the hierarchy, the steps of order. Like hierarchy comes from religious structure. That's like, I think its original meaning. And so if you think about the Pope being higher up than the cardinals or whoever, and then you got people below bishops maybe, and then you got like priests, you know. So you got this definite relationship, this definite structure. And that's another thing folks can think of to get an idea about the ordering of concepts and propositions, more and more abstract. And it's all based on the evidence of the senses. So it's not like if you know about atoms, it's like less abstract because atoms are smaller. No, that's not the way the hierarchy works. The hierarchy, as Aristotle pointed out, is the evidence of the senses. That's first level for everything. And then you can get more abstract, but on a smaller level from there, or more abstract on a broader level. So thinking about an atom is abstract, just like thinking about the solar system or universe is abstract. So to develop our modern concept of the solar system, or to develop the modern concept of the atom, they both take abstraction from the evidence of the senses, the first given perceptual real level. And then they both develop through a hierarchy of knowledge. So, anything to add, Melanie?
He wants to do a dance again.
No, just that I really like Aristotle. Yeah. I really like his approach because it's so easy to understand it. You don't have to sort of suspend anything. You go, okay, I guess that's, you know what I mean? It's just so obvious. And I think if more people were kind of exposed to him, because I sure know I wasn't at all when I was growing up. I never had anything like this growing up, you know. Yeah. So, and it would have made such a difference, you know, because college, you feel like you're kind of fumbling anyway, but wouldn't it be cool to go into that knowing, here, I already got this understood. Now I can build on that.
Yeah.
So, and I think Montessori just sets that up so well.
Yeah, yeah. And it'd be easier to teach people what induction and deduction were. And as I said in the podcast before, I think it's an intellectual crime that students graduate from junior high school and even high school and even junior high school without being able to tell you what the difference between induction and deduction are. That's just a basic idea of how our minds work. And, as I said, we're holistic beings. We're whole, human, integrated, rational animals. And we need to know the different aspects and know how they work to have a full, thriving, happy life. Yeah, we can clearly, if you look out, you can see people who are happy and can be successful and stuff, but we're impaired if we don't know some basics like induction and deduction, because it's not that hard. And that, that's important for knowing how our mind works, how to properly form conclusions. And that if people knew a little bit about definitions and concepts and induction to deduction, there'd be a lot less confusion and frustration about some scientific claims, because it'd be easy to dismiss them, because people would know that, hey, you don't have the right concretes to draw that conclusion. Dismissed. You're doing the fallacy of jumping to conclusions. Simple things like that. Like, I don't know exactly what you do as a biologist, but I know there are certain steps you need to take in your reasoning, and you're missing these steps. That's why you're wrong. But, so Melanie's praying that we stop soon. But yeah, because she's got to.
Not praying, I will have
to eat and do some stuff later. So yeah, we'll have to stop soon. So that was an interesting discussion. That should be valuable for a lot of people, knowing what Montessori really is, because knowing that helps us know better what education is and should be, how to educate and raise our children and our students, and then seeing how it's different from some other systems of education. Any last words, Charlotte?
I can't really think of anything to add. I probably will after we're done.
Yeah, that always happens. Yeah. But that'll be for another day. Just write it down and we can talk about it.
Okay.
Cool. So hopefully we'll have more discussions. Hopefully we didn't scare you off.
That's great. Thank you so much.
So, any last words, Melanie? Cool. Yeah, so I guess to repeat, it's like we discussed what Montessori is, and it's some really valuable information. She has really valuable ideas and methods. Look at both. That's one thing I think people don't grasp enough is method. How we do something matters. It's not just doing martial arts, but how you do it. It's not just playing tennis, but how you do it. It's not just, I'm a teacher, how do you teach? It's not just education, how is it done? Method is very important, and that's another thing that needs to be learned. But how Montessori did things, what she does, part of the how you could think of as the fact that it's connected. She doesn't just do things in isolation. As we talked about with writing, you have this whole connected, integrated process. It's just beautiful.
Yeah, and I wanted to make a plug for Char's book. It's really good. She's got a few books out, and her Montessori book and her short story on American, coming of our country. So I would highly recommend parents pick those up. What you can gain from them is immeasurable. So. And
we'll link to them in the show notes again. We did last time also. Yeah, and hopefully folks, go ahead, what?
I said she's on Amazon, so there's two Charlotte Cushmans there, Charlotte Cushman. So you got to watch out for the right one.
So hopefully, if people found it valuable, and it'd be great, it'd really be good for you, your friends, the culture, if we had shared these ideas, share them with other parents, share them with your friends. Even adults could benefit from this because it'd help them make up for deficiencies in their education, or even if they had a decent one, make it better. This stuff could be used, some of the principles at work. You could go back to the basics and help your people become more creative and be able to learn to think for themselves and push coffee across the counter and
yeah, right.
think of solutions themselves and form concepts and observe. Yeah, but so it's valuable for everybody. So please recommend it. Teachers, school administrators, and as we say, if you could help donate to make the program better, it'd help the culture, it'd help you, it'd help your friends, help the ideas be spread, help us develop them more. Like I've said before, it takes me a long time to make up the show notes. Melanie and I have to prepare for the podcast. Then we have to record it. And then I got to spend like hours and hours and hours putting the show notes together and posting the stuff around social media. A lot of time. And as of now, like the Steve Jobs' wife's foundation is not paying me for it, and neither is the Bill Gates and Melanie Gates Foundation. So, Melinda. Yeah, sorry, Melinda.
Melanie.
Yeah.
But I wanted to add one more thing. Like some people might listen to this and go, well, my kids are grown up, so, I guess it's not really. But you may have grandchildren, and you'll be the grandma or grandpa that has all these fun activities for them to do when they come over and visit you or you go visit them. Imagine filling the day with things that aren't video games and aren't, just sitting and playing on a little handheld device. I mean, there's things you can do that'll help them grow and develop as little individuals. That's got to be more valuable than anything.
Yeah, actually interacting with them.
Yeah. Sure. Go ahead,
Charlotte.
Well, what you guys are talking about now reminds me, when you were asking me, well, if the child enters Montessori at an older age, are they going to get anything out of it? Yeah. And it reminded me that when I took the Montessori training, I mean, here I was an adult, and I learned so much about math just from the Montessori materials. So even if you don't have kids, or if your kids are beyond, or if you've got grandkids coming up and they haven't been in Montessori, it's not to say that they can't still benefit from the materials, because they're just so. I mean, there was some things that I was like just blown away. Yeah. I'm going, why didn't I get this when I went to school?
Or a similar example, when I was in 8th grade, I was totally unprepared because I hadn't done enough reading and writing, and I was unprepared for sentence diagramming and grammar, and it was just a waste of my time. But you still have to sit there and go through it like a prison camp. But 10 or 15 or 20 years ago, I went through a sentence diagramming book, and it was awesome. It helped me a lot. I had done college and all this stuff, and a lot of philosophical reading, and done some writing, and so that helped. Doing that helped me grasp and make sense of grammar. It was really valuable. Or one thing I do with some students, like some people, I don't tutor anymore, but maybe I'll see them and we're talking tutoring and math and stuff. And I show them what I do with area, what I've done with your kids, Melanie, how the area form. Most people learn area formulas in isolation out of nowhere, but I showed Melanie's kids how we derive one from another logically, and I've showed some people that, and they're like, "Oh my God, now it makes sense. Why didn't you tell me that before?" It's because I didn't think about it.
Yeah, that's how I felt. When I took the Montessori training, it was like, oh gosh, and it wasn't only things like math and grammar and stuff like that, but was even movement. Movement is so important. And I mean, I remember in junior high, I'd feel so self-conscious if I came in because I had an appointment, had to walk into the class late, and you're thinking, okay, first of all, I'm going to walk in, then I'm going to put on the desk, then I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that. And you felt so self-conscious.
Yeah, right.
But Montessori, you teach the kids very beginning. This is how you carry a chair. This is how you walk. This is, and they become so aware of their bodies.
True, yeah.
And we weren't taught that.
Yeah, me either. Yeah, good point. So good. Thank you, Shar.
Thank you.
Cool.
This was fun, you guys.
Hell yeah.
Isn't it?
Have to do it again.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. So cool. All right, folks. Hope you enjoyed it, and we will talk to y'all soon.